So when it comes to your preparation for one of these meetings, I mean, first having your message together, like all the things we talked about in the last webinar that I won't repeat here, but just making sure that you've got the right background that you want to share, you've got a great argument for what it is that you need, you know what your ask is going to be, and hopefully you have some sort of informational lead behind that is put together. In addition to that, when I'm prepping for a meeting with lawmakers, there are, roughly speaking, four things that I really like to try to know if I can. One is previous meetings that I have had or the people that are coming with me to the meeting have had with that office. It's great to have that kind of history, especially if as part of that, you can add number two, which is knowing how the office has responded to your previous asks. So if you ask them for funding support, if you ask them for a letter of support on the Build Back Better, if you ask them to attend a previous meeting or something, being able to reference that as well during your meetings just kind of helps reiterate the importance of the connection and gives you a chance to thank them for that participation. And so can certainly be helpful. If you have really key issues related to your ask or to the work that you're doing, knowing where that office stands on those issues is also something that's important. Or if it's, again, just related to it, something that you either might want to particularly emphasize or something you might want to stay away from, depending on where they stand on those things, can certainly be helpful. For example, if I might be going and talking to an office about the importance of trying to pick a nice safe example here. I'll say of the Small Business Innovation Research SBIR program. And I know that office really cares a lot about advanced manufacturing in particular, making sure that I try to know examples that I can speak to in the manufacturing sector as opposed to the life sciences, just that kind of thing can be helpful, of course. And then knowing the experience of the person that you're meeting with can be useful as well. If it's someone newer to the office, do they have a background in the space? Are they from a completely different field? Have they been in the office a long time? Know the actual member well? Are they completely kind of flying blind? Those kinds of things can all be really, really helpful. One other piece of advice that I have, if you're attending a meeting with multiple people, that can kind of be a little awkward. So you don't have to go overly elaborate, but having a quick run of show coordinated amongst you and the other people attending the meeting can be helpful. So for example, if I'm going to a meeting on the Hill with a couple of SSTI members, I'm going to just, because that meeting is typically SSTI with these people, perhaps on the actual meeting invite, I'll quickly say who I am, but then allow the other people to introduce themselves, have them talk about the importance of what they're doing in their regions, how the programs that they have lead to jobs, new technologies, whatever it is they're talking about. And then I can just follow up with the nuts and bolts of whatever it is that we're discussing. But just, again, it doesn't have to be elaborate, but making sure you know that plan so you can have some balance in what you're talking about. And again, try to match on to that office's interest is very helpful. None of this is really rocket science. It's just things that some people, when you first get there to have these types of meetings, it can go out the window if you don't have that plan in advance. And then my last piece of advice on your actual meeting preparation, especially if it's your first time going to the Hill, making sure you kind of know how to get around. Seeing people on their first time going to the Hill, they schedule back-to-back meetings in the House and the Senate. Something as easy as that can make your day really miserable, because that is actually quite a walk, especially if it's hot or bad weather. Also, some of the Senate office, well, actually all of the congressional office buildings have numbering systems that don't entirely make sense. Some of the buildings have weird corridors that have a different number system. Some of them number this way in one building, even though there are staircases connecting them between the two buildings, they number slightly differently in the other one. And so, just knowing where you're going, especially if you have tight windows, is just helpful. Quick things during the meeting, and this really just follows up on what we talked about last time. Just my top advice here is to thank the office for anything they've done before, thank them for their time. These people are typically very busy, but the biggest thing with your communication is to really try to cut out the jargon and don't assume any past knowledge. It's really common to get into a meeting with staff and, you're squeezed between two of their other meetings. They sometimes want to get in, want to get out. They want to be as polite as possible, not make you feel like you're being shunted off but they also don't want to talk longer than they need to. So it's not uncommon for staff to act like they know what you're talking about, just so you don't explain more. Try to avoid taking that bait unless you really know the person and know for sure that they definitely know what you're talking about because of your previous relationship. And go ahead and take the time to explain. They booked you for however much time they book you. So, unless they're really telling you that they actually can't talk for that long, do take advantage of the time, be detailed and thorough, get rid of the jargon, actually explain what you need them to know about the background of your work. You know, try to assess that honestly. Don't give them explanation just to give them explanation. But if there are things that they should know to understand why what you're talking about is important, don't be afraid to do that. And then don't forget to make your ask. Sometimes it's easy to, because you want to try to kind of leave that towards close to the end. So it can be easy to end up getting sidetracked and forget to actually, ask them to do something. And again, as we talked about in the last webinar, your ask could be as simple as, hey, I'd like to have a follow-up conversation with you in 2 months, or I'd really like if, you could come to our event. It can be something that's not asking for anything in legislative terms, but it's good to ask for some things that, you've got a clear reason that you're going to be, or, signposting how you're going to continue to build that relationship. One other thing that's really common in meetings to keep an eye out for, if there is something that you are really looking for an answer on, like let's say, again, to keep it in a nice, safe territory for this conversation, let's say what you're asking for is a letter of support for a future federal grant proposal. And you don't get a clear yes or no, you just get something that's like, oh, that's something we can certainly consider. Don't be afraid to ask follow-ups about what that process is in that case, or what the timeline would be to make a decision, or what additional information they would want to know. Sometimes you just might get a person who's just wanting to be non-committal because they really aren't sure, or they want to be non-committal because it's actually a no and they just don't like telling constituents no. So don't be afraid to ask some follow-ups and get the kind of clarity that you need. It's also, of course, good to try to leave with some action items. And so after the meeting, definitely following up, thanking the person that you met with for the actual meeting, of course, is good. It's a great time to provide more detail about your work. So if you left a one-pager behind, following up with your annual report is a really common approach, continuing to build that communications chain and that relationship. Obviously, if you promise any additional information, either get it to the person right away or give them a timeline for when you will follow up. On the one hand, sometimes people get annoyed by getting too many emails. On the other hand, if you're showing up in their inbox, semi-frequently over the course of a couple of months, you're on the top of their mind, and that's not a bad thing in these cases. And then remind them about the ask as needed. So again, those are the kind of top piece of advice that I wanted to make. Things that, if you're able to step back, I'm sure aren't going to really surprise anybody. But again, it's really easy to sometimes forget in the heat of the moment there. So happy to address any questions, or if anyone else has any experience. I know some of the people on the call have done these meetings as well, probably many times. Happy to hear what you guys have. Or again, if you want to talk specifically about any meetings that you've got coming up, state as well as federal, happy to talk about the details of those.
Thanks, Jason, for the talk. I was wondering too, just in addition to Jason's question,